China and the United States have issued a surprise joint statement at the COP26 summit, agreeing to do more to fight climate change. It aims to cut methane emissions, protect forests, and phase out coal. CGTN's Zhang Nini has more on the unexpected declaration from Glasgow.
10 days into COP26, today China and the United States have announced the joint Glasgow Declaration on enhancing cooperation on climate change. In the press conference this afternoon, China's top climate negotiator Xie Zhenhua and U.S. climate negotiator John Kerry have reaffirmed their willingness to work together despite their differences. They have also set out a plan to do more on top of what they have already been committed to. Fresh announcements from China and the U.S. on working together to address methane emissions, to exchange information on methane control, and to facilitate joint research into the challenges and solutions. Xie Zhenhua said that there is a national plan in place to cut methane in China. Methane, as we know, is 80 times more destructive and potent than CO2, so cutting methane emissions is the single fastest way to limit warming. Both countries have also agreed to improve policies on efficient balancing of electricity supply and demand, encourage integration of solar, storage, and other clean power solutions, and improve energy efficiency policies and standards to reduce electricity waste. Over the past year, both China and U.S. have met over 30 times in virtual meetings. They have met in Shanghai, Tianjin, London, and Glasgow. Both Xie Zhenhua and John Kerry are the main players behind the Paris Agreement. It is through their joint efforts that the various parties have signed the deal 7 years ago.
In the area of climate change, there is more agreement between China and the U.S. than divergence, making it an area with huge potential for cooperation. We're 2 days away from the end of the Glasgow COP, so we hope this joint declaration can make a China-U.S. contribution to the success of COP26.
It commits to a series of important actions, not in the long term, not way out in the future, but now during this decade when it's needed. And I'm pleased to announce that we will work together to limit methane. Methane emissions, a greenhouse gas up to 80 times more destructive, more potent than CO2.
Well, China has already rolled out a number of policies to tackle climate change. So for more on that, let's get over live to our reporter Xinzi Yuan, standing by for us in Beijing. So what more can you tell us?
So as we just heard, both countries have agreed on taking enhanced climate action to effectively address the climate crisis based on the principle of common, but here's the key word, but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities accounting for national conditions. So with that, let's take a look at what China commits to do on tackling climate issues. So I'm going to outline a few of this vision here. So reduce pollution and greenhouse gas emission, curb energy intensive and high emission projects. In addition to that, to promote energy conservation and greater efficiency on utility, and a few others in addition to that. And here is how China is realizing its goal here. So first of all, prioritize development of non-fossil energy. In addition to that, new energy industry witnessed strong growth since 2015. And also, national-wide transport is integrated with more energy efficient on, for example, saving gas and fuel. And also, these are some of the key points highlighted. So what I just mentioned is some of the key points highlighted from the white paper on how China is responding to climate change. And especially these are some of the goals and also how the country is realizing its promises. Again, and I also outlined some of the keywords here. So how China is viewing this effort, these are some of the adjectives. Innovative, coordinated, green, open, and this all come together with a shared with a shared goal, obviously, and also it accelerates in a pace that generates a growing dynamic. Back to you, Jonathan.
All right, Xinzi Yuan live for us in Beijing. Thanks so much for the update there. Well, with more on China's green development, Robert Lawrence Kuhn, chair of the Kuhn Foundation and a CGTN columnist, shares his thoughts.
I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and here's what I'm watching. The critical importance of environmental protection in China's 14th five-year plan and in the country's long-range 15-year roadmap to 2035, when China intends to become, basically, a fully modernized socialist country that is prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, harmonious, and beautiful. But a country cannot claim to be beautiful if its air, water, and soil is severely polluted. No amount of economic development is worth the cost of environmental degradation. Sustainable development is an absolute requirement for China to achieve its national goals. But when actual enterprises polluted, there were obstacles in making them stop. Local officials were more concerned about GDP growth rates to bolster their careers, and corruption and bribery could divert or halt the enforcement. Moreover, when enterprises were caught polluting, even when egregious, the fines were extremely low, a small fraction of what it would have cost to stop the polluting. In fact, the fines were so tiny that they were, in essence, a financial incentive to continue to pollute. No longer. Officials at all levels, along with enterprise executives, now know that the new costs of polluting far outweigh the old benefits. Financial fines will be punitive and painful, and careers can be put in immediate jeopardy. It takes only a few expensive examples for everyone to get the message. Credit President Xi for making the cost prohibitive and the message unambiguous. One lens through which to view China's environmental protection is that of the new development concepts, which drives the 14th Five-Year Plan. Of the 5 concepts, green development at number 3 is right in the middle. Government directives call for breakthroughs. By 2025, a marked rise in green industries, a continued drop in major pollutants, and a slashed carbon emission intensity. The industrial, energy, and transportation structures significantly optimized, the proportion of green industries increased significantly, and the quality of green infrastructure enhanced. By 2035, energy and resource utilization efficiency in key industries and for key products reaching world-class standards. The directives also include promoting wind and solar power and natural gas infrastructure, limiting new coal power capacity, mandatory clean production audits, controlling highly polluting and energy-intensive products, local subsidies to stimulate green consumption, reducing food waste, and improved waste classification. But specific targets are not yet specified. They need to be, and I expect they will be. But I'm keeping watch. I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn.
Well, let's continue this conversation with Wu Changhua. She's joining us from Washington, D.C., the Executive Director of the Professional Association for China's Environment. It's good to have you with us on Global Watch. So a lot of people are saying this joint declaration from China and the U.S. was a surprise. Tell me, was it a surprise to you?
It was. It was a surprise in a good way. I think at least 2 things are coming out of the declaration at this moment in Glasgow at COP26. One, it definitely offered a certain level of assurance to the global community and also supported the COP26 process that the world's 2 largest economies and also 2 largest emitters have agreed to continue to work with each other to support a more successful multilateral process to address climate change challenges there. And some specifics in there, I think particularly the methane efforts, because probably you're aware a couple of days ago when the global methane pledge was announced, China was not part of it. But this declaration definitely has offered more specifics in terms of China not only joining the global effort, but also with a clear timeline and a specific implementation plan coming out before the end of next year. That's very fascinating to see.
So do you think this is going to put pressure on other countries that have so far resisted efforts to fight climate change?
It's hard to tell at this moment. One thing I am sure, I think it definitely offers a certain level of assurance, even adding some confidence to continue to be in the multilateral process. I think, to be fair, all countries, all the parties actually to the Paris Agreement have been making their efforts and commitments Of course, I think that the gap today is around whatever the commitments on the table from each country, each party, and this 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming target there. I think that's the gap that needs to be bridged as much as possible. Somehow, hopefully, somehow the declaration would offer some sort of boost to that process. It's hard to tell whether that's going to fundamentally change the landscape or not. It's hard to tell.
So China's president's been underlining the importance of green transition. He's been talking to the region, APEC leaders, and said that he feels like the region should follow the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Give us an idea of what you think that means.
This principle has been there since the beginning of the Global Climate Framework Convention since 1992. This is pretty much the golden rule that has been holding the global community together, developed and developing countries coming together to work together to address now regarded as the existential threat, the biggest one actually for humanity in this century. What does it mean is that if you look at emissions, and of course the majority of the emissions in the atmosphere has been emitted by industrialized countries in the last century or so. So of course they have to bear responsibility to reduce emissions. On the other side, if you look at the impact, unfortunately, the least developed countries are pretty much suffering disproportionately the extreme weather events, more intensified, more severe weather events, disasters there. So there's a huge demand in terms of that adaptation and the resilience, and those countries happen not to have the resources or resilience to adapt at this moment. That's why in the Paris Agreement, particularly now negotiated intensively, there were two things. One, around this $100 billion every year, which is supposed to be delivered by 2020, but somehow so far still not delivered. And then, of course, then the loss and the damage in terms of compensation, because climate change is already happening and the countries are bearing the, suffering, the consequences there. They need to be compensated to support them on one side, of course, to mitigate the climate change, on the other side, actually to adapt.
So with that in mind, then, how do you assess China's fight against climate change? It's committed to its carbon targets, such as being carbon neutral by the year 2060, but do you think the country could be doing more?
Well, I think we can always say we need to do more, right? Whether you can or not, that really depends on how the political will in each country and also how effectively a country or governments and business community and the society will be able to come together to really work in sync with each other to make sure policy incentives are put together to incentivize technology innovation, to really get the finance flowing, and also the markets, the industry part, all coming together so that we'll be able to address that. From that perspective, I think China definitely on one side has demonstrated its really solid track record in terms of delivering its commitments, even overachieving that by 2020. I don't need to mention the details there. Looking into the future with all the commitments already set actually in the international process, everyone is expecting China to do more. I feel confident. I think at least China will be able to deliver the current commitments, hopefully somehow by putting the two targets, capping emissions, bending the curve, and also achieving carbon neutrality before 2060, really put them at the heart of all the government policy making process, so that we'll be able to really trigger the systemic, integrated systemic reform or transformation, so that we'll be able to really bend the curve as soon as possible. Not only addressing the local issue, but more importantly, contributing to global fight against climate change.
Indeed, as we keep hearing over and over, the time is now. All right, Wu Changhua speaking to us from Washington. Great to have you with us. Thanks so much. Well, still ahead here on Global Watch.